Hiya, Honest Discussioner here. My last video on free will has garnered a lot of discussion with 3 video responses and even some responses to those responses, and plenty of criticism coming from both sides. So I think this definitely warrants a little further discussion. Now, there were 2 criticisms that have been levied against my argument from atheists and Christians. The first would be the argument from rationality here, which basically states that without free will, we cannot have any form of rationality. This is given by a Christian by the name of Legadesi. I hope I pronounced that right. And also an atheist that calls himself Dorpatan. How you guys doing? Now, there's also the argument from morality, stating that even if free will is true, then that means that there cannot be any morality. That without free will, people are just doing the only thing that they can do at the moment, which is what Rational Roundtable says, and that we can't hold anyone responsible for their actions. So let me address these, and I'll address them in reverse order, starting with morality. I believe the argument for morality is basically an appeal to consequence, although I wouldn't say the argument is fallacious on that point alone. It still has implications for how we live our lives today. If I am right and their argument is correct, then I cannot advocate the punishment of anyone, and I should probably want to let everyone out of prison and that sort of thing. Now, the short answer to this is that you're right, but the long answer is you're not right. You're absolutely right in that we cannot get vengeance upon anyone. We cannot do the type of punishment, we cannot institute the type of punishment that's preached in the Bible, let's say, especially the Old Testament. This eye for an eye, this payment for one's actions, that is untenable. I agree. And even before I thought about the free will argument, I already contended that as well. Because to use this form of punishment, this punishment from payment, this you do something so then you must pay a price, I don't believe that that is really in keeping with the true purpose of punishment. Our justice system currently works under this. Basically, if you steal, that you've done something wrong, you must pay for that by spending time in jail. Now, it does serve a small function, and that is it is a disincentive for people to perform their wrong actions. But it still is not really in keeping with what punishment should be. My favorite analogy is to use the analogy of a loving parent seeing their child about to touch a hot stove. And they've told the child numerous times to not touch the hot stove. So, I would argue that a good parent would smack the child's hand, but the question is why? Would they do it because the child disobeyed their actions, or because the child was going to get hurt, and they didn't want them to get hurt, and they were trying to teach them a lesson? They were trying to change the child's behavior, not get revenge on them, or not pay the penalty of disobeying them. We have commands and laws for a reason, not for some arbitrary, subjective sort of thing that I just don't want you to do this. There's a reason behind it, and that reason is to hopefully correct behavior, or to avoid some sort of negative consequence, or maybe even to promote a positive one. In this regard, we do not need free will to assert this form of morality. We don't need to acknowledge that someone chose to kill someone, to also acknowledge that that person should be locked away to prevent further killing, because people's actions still do have consequences. So while they might not have been able to do anything else, that does not change the fact that they still could be a danger to society. In fact, it might even state it even more, because now there is already an established fact that they are capable of this sort of thing, and there are situations in which they will use this form of action known as murder. Same thing with theft and lying and all of these things that we consider wrong. This is why I believe the argument for morality fails. We can still hold people accountable, we just can't get revenge on them. We can, but we wouldn't have any real basis to do so beyond just satisfying our own pleasures. There would be nothing greater, no greater purpose to this. So that is my response to morality. Now, in regards to free will and rationality, Dorpatan argues in the title of his video that in order to assert there's no free will, that would require one to have free will. Now, the first thing I'd like to point out, Dorpatan, is that you use the example of a person claiming that a sports car is better to drive than a clunker Jeep, and you say that without free will one cannot do this, and I'd agree with you, but I'd also say that even with free will one cannot say that the expensive sports car is better. These are opinions, and there's no inherent betterness to the sports car. Someone might think that the clunker Jeep is better because it affords better protection, or the insurance payments are lower, and that the exterior appearance or the speed didn't really matter that much. Now, this doesn't address most of your argument, so let me get on to that. You're basically asserting that if someone is forced to come to a conclusion, then that person cannot claim that their conclusion is logically valid, that they cannot claim that there's any truth to their conclusion for the reasons that it was forced. Now, I think you're using forced in an incorrect way. I think that kind of connotates that there is someone or something making you do it, a conscious entity, and there's no conscious entity that's making me do what I'm doing right now. What I'm doing right now, I believe, is the result of the natural universe. Now, we already know that calculators and computers can calculate information and do so accurately without the need of free will or the need of self-awareness. Now, of course, one might argue that that's because they were programmed by someone that had rationality and followed the laws of logic and had basic free will. Now, I would argue that while that's true, that we ourselves were also programmed, and we were programmed by something that does follow the laws of logic, and that would be the natural universe. We are basically, I would argue, a computer. Now, Kazinu Makul would say that we're not actually a computer, but I'm talking a very complex computer that basically consists of a bunch of different smaller computers all working in tandem. That's neither here nor there. What I'm trying to get past here is that as though a computer can only come up with 2 when you put in 1 plus 1 because it was programmed to, thusly, the way our minds are set up, it can only come to one conclusion based on one set of data at one particular time. Now this, you would argue, might be true, but does not make us rational, but I'd argue that it does, because if it did not make us rational, if our senses were not accurate and our calculations not accurate, we would be dead. We would, evolution would have either not selected us, or our species would have just been wiped off the face of the planet. The fact that we have been so successful, and that when we walk into, and that when we make decisions, they actually do sometimes wind up working out for us, that does show that we are rational. Now, you're just going to argue that I was forced to come to that conclusion, but no. I would argue that the natural universe, which does follow very specific logical laws, resulted in this conclusion. Now, for those of you that do assert free will, I'd like to illustrate my point, I'd like to do a little bit of a thought experiment here. And I want you to think about a situation. Let's just say you have a choice between a cheeseburger and a chicken sandwich. Now, for those of you that assert free will, especially atheists like Dorpatan, basically what you're going to have to do here is show how this whole choice thing is going to work. Because as far as I understand it, what we normally do is we're going to look at the 2 options and weigh the pluses and minuses, and how we're going to change our minds on whether or not one thing is better than the other. From my point of view, we always choose what we feel is the best option at that time, whatever our reasoning for it being the best option. But I don't see any way that we're going to change our conclusions unless we change ourselves or the situation or past experiences. So that would be the challenge that I would levy to the advocates for free will, again, especially for the atheists, because theists might have a little bit of a different way of looking at it that this thought experiment may or may not apply to. So have a nice day. Honest Discussioner, out.